Evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks for joining us. Well, the countdown finally over and the midterm elections finally here. Voters across the nation casting their ballots tonight. Some Americans expressing their frustrations with government. Meantime, the battle on for control of the U.S. Senate. Vice President says at the end of the day, he still thinks the Democrats will have the majority. But let's get the latest now with Karen Travers.
Good evening. This was the most expensive midterm election cycle in history. $3.6 billion spent, and there are about 24 statewide races that are going down to the wire. President Obama's job approval ratings are at career lows, so it is no surprise that Republicans decided to make this entire election season all about his record. The rallies are done, the ads have aired, and now it's finally time to count the votes.
I'm a Republican, and I voted for Republican candidates.
I think this is an important election. I mean, midterm elections are a lot of times overlooked.
Analysts expect that today's nationwide turnout could hit 90 million voters, about 9% more than 2010. But despite that increase at the polls, voters are frustrated.
Neither party in the aftermath of this election is going to be embraced by the country.
Republicans are poised to take control of the Senate.
I'm hoping we're going to have a new majority to take America in a different direction.
And two states to watch, Colorado and Iowa, both critical to President Obama's wins in 2008 and 2012.
There could be a new generation of Republicans coming to town, powered by those two states that have symbolic importance for President Obama.
A major theme this year has been dissatisfaction with President Obama. Just 44% of Americans have a favorable view of the president. In fact, 1/3 of all Senate campaign ads featured an anti-Obama message.
Obama's senator, not yours.
Several key races may not even be decided tonight. There's slow vote counting in Alaska, and there could be runoffs in Louisiana and Georgia.
This easily could go well into December, even January.
One potential bright spot for Democrats. They may pick up several key governor's races. So while the change in power in the Senate will be a major shift, tonight may not produce a clear national mandate for Republicans. Reporting live from Capitol Hill, Karen Travers, ABC News. Back to you.
Thank you, Karen. We'll be checking in to D.C. with our friends there a little bit later on in the program. But now let's turn a little closer to home, where voters casting their ballots in a couple key gubernatorial races. And let's start in New York. Democratic Governor Andrew Cuomo facing off against his Republican challenger Rob Astorino. And the latest poll showed that the governor started today with a lead estimated to be in the neighborhood of 23 points. And our Dominic Carter is there live at the governor's campaign headquarters in Manhattan with the very latest. Dominic?
Well, Richard, it may indeed be a 23-point lead in the polls, but besides Rob Astorino, Governor Cuomo is up against the game of expectations. A strong finish could make him a possible presidential candidate going forward, but if the results are not the way that he wants them to turn out, it could be a major setback. With a smile on his face and girlfriend Sandra Lee on his arm, a confident Cuomo voted at the Presbyterian Church of Mount Kisco. Polls show Cuomo ahead with a double-digit margin. And this morning, he was playing the political game of lowering expectations.
I've enjoyed the entire campaign. I just fundamentally feel good about it. I feel good about what direction the state is headed in.
It's going to be a good day. In the final days of the campaign, the governor has repeatedly urged voters not to be complacent and to get to the polls. Cuomo is expected to cruise to victory, and perhaps the only suspense tonight, how much will he win by percentage-wise, and will the anti-Cuomo liberal vote be sizable? So, Richard, the Cuomo landscape literally becomes a bit more in focus, a bit clearer tonight. This is the headquarters for all the Democrats on the statewide ticket. There will be lots of live interviews coming from this location, and of course, we will be here every step of the way tonight. Reporting from Midtown, I'm Dominic Carter. Richard, let's go back to you.
Thank you very much, Dominic. And Dominic, as you mentioned there, it's not just the governor, but also the attorney general, the incumbent, and the Democrat Eric Schneiderman, and also the state controller, again, the incumbent Tom DiNapoli. They're all there, and expect also a lot of the notable Democratic names will make an appearance before the night is out. But staying in the governor's race, Cuomo's challenger, Rob Astorino, the Westchester County exec, got in one last jab at the governor after voting today. Astorino told reporters that Cuomo pumped millions of dollars into nasty, false ads. Cuomo campaign spokesman fired back, saying that Astorino's comment was a nasty thing to say on Election Day. Well, reporter Christine Persichetti, she joins us now live from the Astorino campaign headquarters in White Plains. Christine?
Hey, Rich, we're at the Crown Plaza in White Plains where the balloons have just arrived. Astorino supporters are hoping that they will be celebrating here later on tonight. As you said, the Westchester County executive spent the day doing some last-minute campaigning. That was after he cast his own vote. He arrived at Hawthorne Elementary School with his family, feeling confident despite those polls you talked about. Recent polls show Governor Andrew Cuomo with a double-digit lead over Astorino, but he brushed that off, saying this morning that the polls don't matter. He pointed out that three-term Governor George Pataki was down 17 points going into the election in 1994. He said it all comes down to today and that his supporters are highly motivated to come out and vote.
I've gone around all 62 counties. People are saying we need help. You know, let's make this state great again. So that's why I'm running. That's why we're going to win tonight. And I had a first good night's sleep last night.
Astorino says he wants to lower property taxes, create jobs, reduce the cost of doing business in the state, end Common Core, and clean up Albany's corruption. As you know, throughout the campaign, he criticized Cuomo's administration for allegedly meddling with an anti-corruption commission, the Moreland Commission, which Cuomo formed. Back out here live, we will be here throughout the night and continue to bring you updates and interviews. Back to you in the studio.
All right, Christine, thank you very much. We'll be checking a little bit. Let's bring in Andrew Whitman here, senior political correspondent. Andrew's going to be crunching the numbers all night long, not just regionally here, but also we'll do the math. Who's going to control the U.S. Senate? We'll talk about that more as the night goes on here. But also, we've got in front of us, and we'll break this down throughout this hour, but at least I would say a half a dozen competitive House races, which isn't always the case. A governor's race, maybe not that tight as expected if you believe the polls in New York, but certainly it is across the state lines in Connecticut. New Jersey may be one of those competitive House races, but there's a lot to look out for. And I think if we look at what we saw in New York, there's an anger out there, maybe not so much directed at this governor, but a palpable frustration, and it's filtered into certainly that race and many others.
Well, but let's keep in mind, New York is a 2-to-1 Democratic state, so it was always going to be long odds for a Republican to pull off an upset in the gubernatorial race or in any of the statewide races. No Republican has won statewide office in New York since 2002. George Pataki, the last to pull that off. But the numbers this year for Andrew Cuomo, we don't expect they're going to be anywhere near where they were 4 years ago. Part of that dissatisfaction with Andrew Cuomo and questions about his administration, part of it the general mood of the country right now. And as you mentioned, voter apathy, voter frustration, voter anger. I'm looking at numbers that say 79% of voters across the country say they're dissatisfied with Congress. And we've seen their approval ratings in Congress, single digits and low double digits. It's going to be interesting, though, to see how voters take that sentiment and use it at the ballot box. Will they vote against the president's party? Will they vote against their incumbent? Will they vote for whatever change just happens to be around the corner?
How will turnout be?
How will turnout be? A lot of people think it's going to be around 1/3, maybe 33%.
And just come back to the governor's race in New York. What'll be interesting is turnout, as you mentioned, the breakout between upstate and downstate. The president is not under, the governor not underwater. His favorability ratings not where they once were, but still above 50%. And nowadays that's saying something. But also a name to keep an eye on here, Howie Hawkins, the independent candidate. We interviewed him not long ago in the program. He was polling at one point around 8%. Even if he's at 6% or so like that, that's probably going to be taken away from the governor's numbers, and it'll make the margin that much closer. If the governor wanted a mandate here walking out of this time, it might be hard to say that.
Hawkins is running to the left of Andrew Cuomo. He's the Green Party nominee in the race for governor. We saw in the Democratic primary another challenge to Cuomo's left from Zephyr Teachout. She got more than 30% of the vote in the Democratic primary. Hawkins isn't going to do as well as Zephyr Teachout did, but that gives you an idea that there is progressive dissatisfaction with Andrew Cuomo. The question is how much, again, everybody expects Andrew Cuomo is going to win, but how much of Cuomo's voters either stay home or vote Hawkins, and how that erodes from Cuomo's numbers. Nobody seriously thinks that it's going to be enough for Rob Astorino to make up the difference.
We've been using 18 points here as the over-under. Will he win by more or less than that? And also the coattails, what happens to some of the state Senate races? And really, the state Senate could go either way here tonight.
State Senate and congressional races both being impacted by no presidential race on the ballot and let's say less than enthusiastic support for the gubernatorial race. So there's not a lot drawing out Democrats in some of these key races.
Now, tonight, President Obama is urging voters in Hartford to head back to the polls after problems with early morning voting. Now, Governor Daniel Malloy's campaign says 12 polling locations in the Hartford area failed to open their doors on time this morning. His camp is asking a state judge to extend voting hours due to those problems. Now, recent polls, though, show that Governor Malloy, he's in a battle here tonight, neck and neck with his Republican challenger again, businessman Tom Foley. Kimberly Wallace, she joins us live now from Malloy campaign headquarters tonight in the aforementioned Hartford. Kim?
A battle indeed, Rich. Now, of course, the governor eked out a win 4 years ago by 6,400 votes against Foley. The question is, can he do it again today? Just a few days ago, the governor was joined by President Obama, who stumped for the Democrat incumbent in what has been a neck-and-neck race. This time around, Malloy has been touting his accomplishments during his administration, including the expansion of Medicaid, this year's legislation he signed implementing universal pre-kindergarten, the creation of over 60,000 private sector jobs. In the last 4 years, he also signed a controversial gun control law, but Malloy stands by his decision and says he will not allow a repeal of the law. He's also promised not to cut state aid to cities and towns and no tax increases if reelected. Malloy was among the early risers at the polls. He and others experienced some of the delays after some polling places didn't have printed ballots in time for the 6 a.m. voting start.
We can win it if we execute tomorrow and tonight. And we don't let up until 8 p.m. tomorrow night. And if there's a line at 8 p.m., we don't let up until everyone's voted in the line.
That, of course, was the governor doing some last-minute campaigning yesterday. He's also been hitting the ground hard today. But after he experienced some issues at the polls, he and other voters as well, he did ask the Hartford Superior Court to keep the polls open for voters just here in Hartford for an extra hour. And I just found out literally seconds ago that 2 places in Hartford will stay open until 8:30. We are trying to determine the location, those exact locations. I'm sure that you can call the city of Hartford to find out those exact locations. And we will have that information for you as soon as we do get it. That's the latest live from Hartford. Kimberly Wallace for FiOS 1 News for RFL. Rich, Andrew?
That's a mouthful. Thank you, Kim. And as Kim mentioned, those polling places, Hartford, not surprisingly, why the governor is so invested there, typically Democratic strongholds here, and they turned out 4 years ago. If you looked at some of the extra polling in big numbers for the governor, we'll see if it happens this time around. Now, on the other side of the aisle, Mr. Foley and his supporters are at his headquarters in Greenwich, and that is where Christina Giarelli, she joins us live there as well. Christina?
Yeah, polls are showing that this race is too close to call between Tom Foley and Governor Daniel Malloy, but this time Foley says he'll win because Connecticut wants change.
I think we're going to win this by 2 to 4 points, which in a blue state for a Republican against a Democrat incumbent will really be remarkable.
Foley shaking hands with voters and greeting them with confidence at the polls this morning.
We're seeing, I think, people coming out supporting change.
4 years ago, Malloy defeated Foley by less than 1%, about 6,000 votes out of 1.1 million. A final Quinnipiac University poll shows Malloy leading by a slight 3%, but that lead is within the poll's margin of error, meaning it could go either way.
I'm hoping for a Tom Foley victory tonight like it should have been 4 years ago.
I think it's exciting that there's been a good political debate. It's interesting to have the rematch with Mr. Foley, but I do think Malloy is going to win.
But Foley says a lot's changed in Connecticut, and not for the better.
Governor Malloy said he wouldn't raise taxes, and then he did. I think he broke trust with the citizens and they're upset about it, and I think justifiably so.
Now, 4 years ago, Malloy won huge numbers in cities like Bridgeport. It was the closest race Connecticut's seen in 50 years, and now they're in that race again. For Richard French Live, I'm Christina Chiarelli.
Thank you very much, Christina. Okay, Andrew, we mentioned that governor's race are going to keep a close eye on tonight, but you also have other races that I think are going to be interesting how they play out on the statewide level. Coming back to New York for a minute, the AG's race. Cahill, a credible candidate for Republicans. He, of course, very close confidant of then Governor George Pataki.
The chief of staff, I believe.
Exactly. And then running against the incumbent Eric Schneiderman, who you'd figure would get a big bump from the governor. But even though they may be sharing the same arena tonight, those two guys have not always been on the same page.
They certainly haven't. And Cuomo certainly knows well the political power of the Attorney General's office as a former New York Attorney General himself. Two consecutive attorneys general in New York have gone on to become governor. Before that was Eliot Spitzer. You could make the argument, and I think most observers would, that Cuomo has gone out of his way to make sure that Schneiderman, let's say, doesn't expand his profile or expand his power base all that much, and that's been fairly effective. Now, Schneiderman was looked at by Republicans at the beginning of the cycle as the most beatable statewide Democrat. Cahill's a good candidate running from Republicans. He used to be a regular on RFL for a stretch. And he seems to know what he's doing. It just hasn't caught on.
It's money, it's registration. It's such a hurdle. We're going to talk about that.
And it's also name recognition. We've talked about it many times. The Republican Party in the state of New York has a very shallow bench. It's not a lot of good statewide name recognition at the beginning of a cycle like this. And Cahill has not been able to overcome that, at least in the polling that we've seen. Now, again, we don't have a lot of enthusiasm on the Democratic side in the governor's race. We'll see how that impacts the race for Attorney General and also the race for state controller.
And, we're going to have an interesting conversation for New Yorkers interested in this, in that tonight we'll talk to Ed Cox, who's the state chairman. Party chairman for the Republicans, but also we're going to have Steve Levy on set with us tonight. You may remember Steve Levy from Suffolk County, county executive. He was a moderate Democrat there. He was convinced to run as a Republican in the governor's race. It didn't turn out well. He didn't make it through the primary. And a lot of people said it was evidence you couldn't be a moderate and be a statewide candidate if you couldn't pass those social litmus tests, gay marriage, pro-choice, et cetera, like that. That would basically disqualify you from the conservatives. But as we look at New York here, potentially, if Republicans don't win, it could be 13 years and counting since a Republican has won a statewide office in New York, which is kind of amazing. All right. When we come back, though, we will go and take a closer look at the race for U.S. Senate. Will the nation see a Republican takeover when it's all said and done tonight? We're also going to head over to New York and take a look at a state Senate race in our backyard as well, actually New Jersey. Stay with us, everybody. We'll be right back.
And good evening, I'm meteorologist Jeff Denoria. A fabulous day out there for your Tuesday with abundant sunshine and mild temperatures. Many areas touch 70 degrees. Right now, we're in the 60s. A little cooler for you in beautiful Belmar at 61, but Caldwell, you're still at 68 degrees. We do have some clouds that are making their way across the area as we speak, and I do think it will be mostly cloudy during the overnight. Nothing in the way of any rainfall, just cloud cover. As we get in the day tomorrow, that sunshine is going to try to fight real hard through the clouds. Sunshine will be limited tomorrow. Not as bright as it was today, but still mild. There's a system off to our west. This will eventually get here Wednesday night into Thursday. So tomorrow, no problems, just not as much sunshine, mid-60s. Rain late Wednesday night, Thursday. Heavy at times in the afternoon, upper 50s. And then a lingering shower Friday morning. Clearing in the afternoon, but breezy and falling temperatures, 50s right into the 40s by the late afternoon.